I stood in the Italian marble entryway of our Willowcrest estate, my Louis Vuitton suitcase at my feet, watching my husband Cameron celebrate with champagne while a team of corporate lawyers finalized what would become the worst 24 hours of his entire life. The sound of that Dom Perignon cork exploding felt like thunder before the storm that was about to destroy everything he thought he'd won. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. Before we dive into this shocking story of betrayal and instant karma, let me know in the comments where you're watching from around the world. And if stories of justice being served in the most satisfying way possible get your blood pumping like they do mine, smash that subscribe button because tomorrow's story is going to leave you absolutely speechless. $62 million, Cameron Ashworth shouted, his voice echoing off the 20-foot cathedral ceilings of our Connecticut mansion. Global tech industries just made us multimillionaires, baby! We're finally free from all the stress. Free. The word cut through me like a blade. 30 minutes earlier, those same lawyers had slid divorce papers across our mahogany dining table, along with a settlement check that made my hands shake, not from excitement, but from pure rage. $125,000. That was apparently my worth after 9 years of marriage and building what had just become a $62 million empire. This should cover your transition expenses quite comfortably, Mrs. Ashworth, the lead attorney had said with the kind of practice indifference that comes from destroying lives for a living. Mr. Ashworth has been quite generous considering the circumstances. The circumstances, as if I was some kind of liability that needed to be cleaned up before Cameron could enjoy his newfound fortune. Natalie will be moving into the guest wing this weekend, Cameron had announced, not even bothering to look at me as he signed document after document. So we'll need you relocated by tomorrow evening. Natalie, his 29-year-old executive assistant who had joined our biotechnology firm just 10 months ago. The same brilliant, ambitious woman I had personally recruited from Harvard because she reminded me of myself 15 years earlier, hungry, determined, and willing to work 80-hour weeks to prove herself in the cutthroat world of pharmaceutical development. Standing there, watching my husband toast his freedom while I held the remnants of my life in a single suitcase, I almost laughed at the cosmic irony. But let me take you back to where this story really begins, because what Cameron didn't know, what he was about to discover in the most devastating way imaginable, was that he had just made the most expensive mistake in corporate history. My name is Dr. Olivia Ashworth, though it was Dr. Olivia Chen before I married Cameron 9 years ago in a small ceremony overlooking the Hudson River. Back then, Cameron was a charismatic MBA with big dreams and even bigger debts from his Stanford Business School loans. I, on the other hand, was a biochemical engineer at Meridian Pharmaceuticals, earning a 7-figure salary while Cameron struggled to land even entry-level positions at consulting firms. When Cameron came to me with his vision for a revolutionary biotech startup focused on personalized cancer treatments, I didn't just believe in his pitch, I funded his entire operation. I liquidated my stock portfolio, cashed out my retirement accounts, and invested every penny of my $780,000 in savings into what would eventually become Ashworth Therapeutics. But money was just the beginning of what I gave Cameron. What I provided was something infinitely more valuable: my expertise, my network, and most importantly, the groundbreaking research I had been developing in secret for 3 years. You see, while working at Meridian, I had been conducting independent research using my own equipment and personal laboratory space. Late nights, weekends, vacation time, I had invested over 3,000 hours developing a novel approach to targeted cancer therapy using modified T-cell treatments. It was revolutionary work that could potentially save millions of lives and generate billions in revenue. When Cameron and I launched Ashworth Therapeutics, I made what I thought was a loving gesture between partners. I signed over my research patents to our joint company, believing we were building something together. After all, we were married. We were a team. His success was my success, right? For 4 years, we worked side by side in a converted warehouse in Bridgeport, Connecticut. I ran the laboratory operations and research development, while Cameron handled business operations and investor relations. We were the perfect combination, my scientific genius and his business acumen, working 18-hour days fueled by coffee and shared dreams of changing the world. Our breakthrough came in year 5, when our T-cell therapy showed unprecedented results in clinical trials. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer patients, people given weeks to live, were going into complete remission. The medical community was stunned. Suddenly, every major pharmaceutical company in the world wanted to partner with Ashworth Therapeutics. As our company valuation soared, from millions to hundreds of millions, Cameron insisted we needed to professionalize our image for the big leagues. That meant moving to this Willowcrest estate, hiring a full executive team, and most important for Cameron, bringing in what he called serious business talent to handle major deal negotiations.
Liv, you're absolutely brilliant with the science side, Cameron had said, with that patronizing smile I was starting to recognize. But we need people with corporate pharmaceutical experience for these billion-dollar conversations. You understand, right? I understood perfectly. I understood that my PhD in biochemical engineering from MIT wasn't impressive enough for the boardrooms Cameron wanted to conquer. I understood that despite creating the core technology that made our success possible, I was being viewed as a liability rather than an asset in high-stakes business negotiations. So I stepped back. I retreated to my laboratory while Cameron hired his MBA-wielding executives and smooth-talking dealmakers. I told myself it was temporary, that once we secured the right partnership, I would resume my rightful place as co-founder and chief scientific officer. Instead, Cameron systematically erased me from our company's narrative entirely. At pharmaceutical conferences, he presented himself as the visionary founder behind Ashworth Therapeutics' proprietary cancer treatment protocols. In interviews with medical journals, my contributions were reduced to early laboratory consulting. When venture capital firms and acquisition targets asked about our research team, Cameron introduced me as his very talented wife who helps out with the technical details. I watched my life's work, research that had consumed years of my life and represented the potential to save countless others, being rebranded as Cameron's genius, while I smiled and played the supportive spouse at industry galas and board meetings. The most crushing part was that I convinced myself this was normal, that successful couples made sacrifices for each other, that my recognition would come eventually once our technology changed the world and saved lives. But eventually never came. This morning, when Cameron woke me with divorce papers and a buyout offer that wouldn't even cover the property taxes on our estate, I realized that my husband hadn't just been taking credit for my work, he had been planning to steal it entirely. 9 years of marriage, 6 years of building a company together, and countless sleepless nights perfecting the technology that had just sold for $62 million. And Cameron genuinely believed that $125,000 was fair compensation for creating what Fortune magazine had called the most promising cancer treatment breakthrough in pharmaceutical history. "You'll be absolutely fine, Liv," he had said, using my nickname in a tone that felt dismissive rather than affectionate. "You're talented. You'll land on your feet somewhere." Somewhere. As if I was being relocated rather than having my life's work stolen from me. As I stood in that marble entryway, watching Cameron pop another bottle of champagne while Natalie giggled at his side, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The woman who had spent 9 years accommodating, compromising, and diminishing herself to make Cameron's dreams possible was done being invisible. But what Cameron didn't know, what he was about to learn in the most painful way possible, was that his eagerness to erase me from Ashworth Therapeutics' success story had caused him to overlook some very important legal details. Details that were about to turn his $62 million celebration into the most expensive mistake of his life. You see, Cameron had made one crucial error in his haste to rewrite history and start fresh with Natalie. He had forgotten that the brilliant scientist he was discarding actually held the real keys to everything he just sold. The next 24 hours would teach Cameron Ashworth that when you try to steal someone's life's work, you better make absolutely sure you actually own what you're selling. But let me back up and tell you exactly how Cameron and I built what would become a $62 million empire, because understanding our foundation makes what happens next even more shocking. I first met Cameron Ashworth at a biotech networking event in Boston back in 2015. I was 32, already making headlines in pharmaceutical research circles for my innovative work on cellular immunotherapy. Cameron was 28, fresh out of Stanford's MBA program with student loans that exceeded most people's mortgages and a charm that could convince investors to fund anything. At that networking event, I was the keynote speaker presenting my preliminary research on modified T-cell treatments for aggressive cancers. Cameron was working the room as a junior analyst at a small biotech consulting firm, barely making enough to cover his rent in a shared apartment in Cambridge. After my presentation, he approached me at the reception with genuine curiosity about the science, not just the business applications. Most MBA types glazed over when I talked about cellular modification protocols, but Cameron asked intelligent questions about scalability and manufacturing challenges. Dr. Chen, he said, using my maiden name, what you're describing could revolutionize cancer treatment, but more importantly, it could save my mother's life. That stopped me cold. Cameron explained that his mother had been diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer 6 months earlier. Traditional chemotherapy wasn't working, and her oncologist had given her less than 2 years to live. I'm not approaching you as a business opportunity, Cameron continued, his usual confident demeanor cracking slightly. I'm asking as a son who's watching his mother die. Is there any way your research could help her? I spent the next hour explaining my work in detail, not as a scientist presenting to a potential investor, but as one human being trying to help another. Cameron listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, and took careful notes. By the end of our conversation, I had agreed to review his mother's medical records and see if she might qualify for any experimental programs. That's how our relationship began, not with business ambitions or romantic attraction, but with me trying to save the life of someone he loved. Over the following months, we stayed in regular contact about his mother's treatment options. I connected them with clinical trials, reviewed her progress reports, and even consulted with her oncology team on alternative approaches. Slowly, our professional relationship evolved into friendship, and eventually into something deeper. Cameron was unlike anyone I had ever dated. He genuinely understood the pressure and isolation that came with being a pioneering researcher. When I worked late nights in the lab, he would show up with coffee and healthy takeout, content to sit quietly while I ran experiments. He never made me feel guilty for prioritizing my research or suggested that I should scale back my ambitions. More importantly, he believed in my work with an intensity that matched my own passion. While other men I had dated seemed intimidated by my career success, Cameron actively encouraged me to think bigger. Liv, you're not just developing a treatment, he would say during our long conversations about the future. You're creating a platform that could eliminate cancer as we know it. You shouldn't be working for someone else's pharmaceutical company. You should be building your own. When Cameron proposed to me 18 months later, it wasn't at a fancy restaurant or exotic vacation destination. He proposed in my laboratory at Meridian Pharmaceuticals at 2 a.m, right after I had successfully completed a breakthrough experiment that proved my T-cell modification process could target multiple cancer types simultaneously. "Marry me, Dr. Chen," he said, getting down on one knee between the centrifuge and the electron microscope.
not because I want to be married to a brilliant scientist, but because I want to spend my life helping you change the world. I said yes immediately, not just to the marriage, but to the dream we started building together that night. Cameron's business plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would leave Meridian Pharmaceuticals and establish an independent research operation. He would handle all the administrative, legal, and financial aspects of building a company around my innovations. We would bootstrap the operation using my savings and his connections, maintaining complete control over our intellectual property until we were ready to scale. The plan made perfect sense. I had the scientific expertise and breakthrough technology. Cameron had the business training and entrepreneurial vision. Together, we could build something that no established pharmaceutical company would risk developing. Truly revolutionary cancer treatment that prioritized patient outcomes over profit margins. I gave my notice at Meridian Pharmaceuticals 3 weeks after our wedding, walking away from a $1.2 million annual salary and stock options that would have made me independently wealthy within 5 years. But I believed in our shared vision more than I believed in personal financial security. Cameron found us a 15,000 square foot warehouse in Bridgeport, Connecticut, that had previously housed a small manufacturing operation. We spent 6 months converting it into a state-of-the-art research facility, with Cameron handling the contractors and permits, while I designed the laboratory specifications. I liquidated my entire investment portfolio, $780,000, accumulated over 8 years of high-salary work. It was every penny I had ever saved, invested in our shared future. But my financial contribution was nothing compared to what I brought to our partnership scientifically. The T-cell modification research I had been developing at Meridian Pharmaceuticals represented over 4 years of intensive work, conducted primarily during my personal time using equipment I had purchased independently. Here's what most people don't understand about pharmaceutical research. The real breakthroughs happen during those late nights and weekend sessions when you're exploring ideas that don't fit into corporate research mandates. While Meridian paid me to work on their approved projects, my most innovative work happened on my own time using my own resources. I had documented every aspect of my independent research meticulously: laboratory notebooks with time-stamped entries, video recordings of successful experiments, computer files with version control showing the evolution of my methodologies. When Cameron and I launched Ashworth Therapeutics, I brought 3 years of breakthrough research that no other company possessed. But more than just research data, I brought something irreplaceable: the intuitive understanding of cellular behavior that comes from thousands of hours of hands-on laboratory work. You can't teach someone how to recognize the subtle variations in cell cultures that indicate successful modification. You can't download the instinctive timing required to optimize T-cell activation protocols. That knowledge lives in my hands, my eyes, my scientific intuition, developed over years of dedicated practice. Cameron understood this completely during our early years. He would often tell investors and partners that I wasn't just Ashworth Therapeutics' chief scientist, I was the irreplaceable foundation upon which everything else was built. Liv doesn't just run our research program, she is our research program. Everything we've accomplished traces back to her innovations.
For the first 4 years, we were genuinely equal partners in every sense. Cameron handled business operations, regulatory compliance, and investor relations, while I managed all research activities and product development. We made every major decision together, shared every success and setback, and built something that reflected both of our contributions. Our personal relationship during those early years was just as collaborative as our professional partnership. We worked long hours, but always made time for each other. Cameron would bring me lunch in the laboratory and listen patiently while I explained my latest experimental results. I would review his business presentations and offer suggestions for explaining the science in accessible terms. We were building something meaningful together, not just a successful company, but a genuine partnership between two people who complemented each other's strengths perfectly. The first hint that something was changing came during our third year, when Cameron started referring to certain aspects of our work as proprietary to Ashworth Therapeutics, rather than acknowledging my individual contributions. It was subtle at first, just changes in language during investor presentations. Instead of saying, Olivia developed a novel approach, he would say, Ashworth Therapeutics has developed proprietary methods. Instead of, Dr. Chen's research indicates, it became, our internal studies demonstrate. I initially dismissed these changes as natural evolution of our business language. After all, we were trying to present ourselves as a serious company rather than a two-person operation built around one scientist's work. I assumed Cameron was simply professionalizing our communications to appeal to potential partners and investors. But looking back now, I can see that Cameron was beginning the process of writing me out of our success story long before I realized what was happening. He was systematically replacing acknowledgement of my individual contributions with generic company accomplishments, preparing to claim credit for innovations that existed only because of my years of independent research. What I didn't understand then, what I would only discover much later, was that Cameron's transformation from supportive partner to credit-stealing opportunist wasn't gradual. It was calculated, deliberate, and designed to position him as the sole genius behind everything we had built together. The man who had once proposed to me in my laboratory, promising to help me change the world, was secretly planning to steal that world for himself. The shift didn't happen overnight. Like cancer itself, Cameron's transformation was insidious, spreading through our partnership so gradually that I barely noticed until the damage was irreversible. It started in year 4, when our T-cell therapy showed remarkable results in our first human trials. Patients with terminal pancreatic cancer were experiencing complete remission rates that had never been documented in medical history. The pharmaceutical world was buzzing with excitement about Ashworth Therapeutics, and suddenly everyone wanted to meet the genius behind the breakthrough. Cameron began accepting speaking engagements at major medical conferences, positioning himself as the visionary founder who had revolutionized cancer treatment. I encouraged this initially, believing that his business expertise and polished presentation skills would help us attract the right kind of attention from potential partners and investors. The first time I noticed something troubling was at the International Oncology Summit in Chicago. Cameron was delivering the keynote address about our breakthrough therapy, and I was sitting in the audience, proud to watch my husband present our life's work to over 2,000 medical professionals. When I first conceived of this approach to cellular immunotherapy, Cameron said confidently, I knew we were dealing with something that could fundamentally change how we treat aggressive cancers. When he conceived it, not when we developed it together, not when I spent 3 years perfecting the protocols, when he conceived it. I told myself it was just speaking nerves, that Cameron had misspoken under pressure. After all, he knew better than anyone that the entire therapeutic approach had emerged from my independent research. He had watched me develop every aspect of the treatment methodology in our laboratory. But during the question and answer session, something even more disturbing happened. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a respected oncologist from Memorial Sloan Kettering, asked about the specific cellular modification techniques that made our therapy so effective. Cameron answered confidently, describing processes he had never performed himself, using technical terminology I had taught him during our late-night conversations in the laboratory. He spoke about his methodology and his research protocols, as if he had personally developed every aspect of our breakthrough treatment. I sat there in stunned silence as my husband took complete credit for innovations that represented years of my independent work. When audience members asked follow-up questions about laboratory procedures,
Cameron deflected smoothly, saying his research team handled the technical implementation while he focused on the strategic vision. His research team, as if I was just another employee rather than the scientist who had created everything he was describing. After the presentations, dozens of pharmaceutical executives and medical researchers approached Cameron for private discussions about licensing opportunities and potential partnerships. I watched from across the reception hall as he networked confidently, describing our technology as his breakthrough and his proprietary approach. When I finally managed to pull him aside, I asked directly about his presentation language. Cameron, why did you say you conceived of the cellular modification approach? You know that came from my independent research before we even started the company. He looked at me with genuine confusion, as if my question made no sense.
Liv, we're married. We built this company together. When I talk about my work, I'm talking about our work. You're being overly sensitive about presentation semantics. But it wasn't semantics. Over the following months, Cameron's speaking engagements became increasingly frequent, and his credit-taking became increasingly bold. Industry publications began featuring him as the biotech entrepreneur who cracked the code on cellular immunotherapy. Forbes include him in their 30 under 30 healthcare innovators list, with an article that never mentioned my name once. When I raised concerns about these articles, Cameron dismissed my worries with patronizing reassurance. Honey, recognition will come. Right now, we need to establish Ashworth Therapeutics as a serious company with strong leadership. Once we secure the right partnerships, there will be plenty of opportunities to highlight your technical contributions. My technical contributions? As if the revolutionary science that made our success possible was just technical support for his business vision. The erosion accelerated when Cameron decided we needed to hire senior executives to help scale our operations for potential acquisition discussions. He recruited Dr. Harold Westfield, a former pharmaceutical executive with 30 years of industry experience, as our chief operating officer. Harold brings the kind of credibility we need for billion-dollar conversations, Cameron explained. He's worked with Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, all the major players. Having someone like him validates our approach to serious investors. During Harold's first week, Cameron gave him a comprehensive briefing on our company's history and technological advantages. I happened to walk into the conference room during part of this orientation session, and what I heard made my blood run cold. The breakthrough came when I realized that traditional T-cell therapies were approaching cellular modification from the wrong angle. My research indicated that we needed to target multiple receptor pathways simultaneously rather than focusing on single target approaches. His research. Harold was taking careful notes, nodding appreciatively, as Cameron described innovations I had developed through years of painstaking laboratory work. When Cameron noticed me standing in the doorway, he smiled warmly and gestured me into the room. Harold, I'd like to meet you my wife, Dr. Olivia Ashworth. She runs our laboratory operations and handles the day-to-day implementation of our research protocols. Implementation. As if I was a highly skilled technician carrying out Cameron's brilliant instructions rather than the scientist who had created every protocol Harold was learning about. Harold stood to shake my hand respectfully. Dr. Ashworth, Cameron has been explaining the remarkable work you do to translate his theoretical innovations into practical applications. It's clear that Ashworth Therapeutics is fortunate to have such talented laboratory management. I managed to maintain my composure during that meeting, but afterward, I confronted Cameron directly about his misrepresentation of our roles. Cameron, you can't seriously believe that Harold should think I'm just implementing your theories. You know perfectly well that I developed every aspect of our T-cell modification approach independently before we even met. Cameron's response revealed just how far his thinking had shifted.
Liv, you're being unrealistic about business dynamics. Harold doesn't need to understand the granular history of how every innovation developed. He needs to understand our current organizational structure and strategic direction. But you're lying about fundamental facts. You're telling him you developed research that you know I created. I'm not lying. I'm presenting our company's capabilities in terms that senior executives can understand and respect. You developed the laboratory procedures, but I conceived of the business application and strategic implementation. That's collaborative innovation. Collaborative innovation? Cameron had found a way to rationalize stealing credit for my work by reframing scientific breakthroughs as business strategy. The erosion accelerated when Cameron decided we needed to hire senior executives to help scale our operations for potential acquisition discussions. Dr. Patricia Knowles, our new chief medical officer, was told that Cameron had pioneered the cellular modification techniques that set Ashworth Therapeutics apart from traditional immunotherapy approaches. James Crawford, our vice president of business development, learned that Cameron's breakthrough research had fundamentally reimagined how T-cell therapies could be optimized for patient outcomes. Sarah Kim, our director of regulatory affairs, was briefed on how Cameron's innovative methodology represented the next generation of personalized cancer treatment. I watched my life's work being systematically reattributed to my husband while being reduced to the role of laboratory director who managed the technical implementation of his brilliant innovations. The most painful part was how naturally Cameron seemed to believe his own revisionist history. During our private conversations, he still occasionally acknowledged my contributions, but even those acknowledgments became increasingly qualified. Instead of your breakthrough research, he would say the research we developed together. Instead of your innovative protocols, it became our proprietary methodology. Instead of your years of independent work, he referred to the foundation we built collaboratively. Cameron was gradually erasing me from our success story while convincing himself that he was simply presenting a unified company narrative. The erosion extended beyond our professional relationship into our personal marriage. Cameron began making unilateral decisions about our company's direction, presenting them to me as strategic necessities, rather than discussing them as equal partners. When pharmaceutical giants started expressing serious acquisition interest, Cameron hired expensive legal and financial advisors without consulting me about the selection process or negotiation strategy. These are complex business decisions that require specialized expertise. You should focus on maintaining our research quality while I handle the strategic considerations.
I should focus. As if preserving the scientific integrity of work I had created was my assigned role, rather than my fundamental right as the innovator behind our success. The most devastating moment came when Cameron scheduled a meeting with representatives from Global Tech Industries, the pharmaceutical conglomerate that would eventually acquire us, without informing me until the morning of their visit. They specifically requested a technical briefing on our research capabilities, Cameron said casually over breakfast. I'll handle the strategic discussion, but they'll want some detailed explanations of our laboratory procedures. Some detailed explanations. He was reducing my role to providing technical support for his business presentation. During that crucial meeting with Global Tech's executives, I sat silent while Cameron presented my research as his breakthrough innovation. When the executives asked probing questions about our development timeline and methodology, Cameron answered confidently, occasionally glancing at me for confirmation of technical details. Dr. Michael Chen, Global Tech's chief science officer, was particularly interested in our cellular modification protocols. Mr. Ashworth, the precision of your targeting mechanisms suggests years of iterative development. How did you approach optimizing the receptor pathway selections? Cameron smiled confidently. It was a matter of recognizing that traditional approaches were too narrow in scope. My research indicated that we needed to think systemically about T-cell activation rather than focusing on individual cellular responses. My research, my innovations, my years of development work,
all presented as Cameron's strategic vision while I provided silent technical support. By the time Global Tech made their formal acquisition offer, I had been completely marginalized from the business relationship that would determine our company's future. Cameron handled all negotiations independently, consulting with his hired advisors and senior executives, while treating me as a valuable but subordinate employee. When he finally presented me with the divorce papers and settlement offer, I realized that the erosion hadn't been accidental or gradual. It had been methodical preparation for this moment, when Cameron would claim complete ownership of everything we had built together while discarding me as an unnecessary complication. He had spent years systematically rewriting our history, establishing himself as the sole genius behind our success, while reducing me to a supportive role that could be easily replaced. What Cameron didn't realize was that his careful campaign to erase me from our company's story had created the perfect conditions for his own destruction. Because while he had been busy taking credit for my work, he had never bothered to understand the legal foundations that made our success possible. And that oversight was about to cost him everything. The morning that shattered my world started like any other Tuesday. I was in the laboratory at 6 a.m. reviewing overnight cell culture results when Cameron appeared in the doorway with his morning coffee and an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of nervous excitement and cold determination. "Liv, we need to talk in the house. There are some papers I need you to look at." I assumed he was referring to the final Global Tech Industries acquisition documents. For weeks, Cameron had been telling me that we would review the terms together before signing anything, though he had been increasingly vague about specific details of their offer. What I found waiting on our dining room table was far worse than I could have imagined. 3 attorneys in expensive suits sat alongside Cameron, their briefcases open and documents spread across the mahogany surface like weapons prepared for battle. Dr. Ashworth, the lead attorney, said without standing, "I'm Richard Blackwell from Morrison Sterling & Associates. We represent your husband in some business matters that require immediate attention." Business matters. My stomach dropped as I noticed the stack of papers in front of Cameron's chair, topped with documents I recognized immediately. Divorce petition forms. "Cameron, what is this?" I asked, my voice barely steady. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Instead, he gestured for me to sit in the chair opposite him, across from the legal team that had apparently been working on this betrayal without my knowledge. "Olivia, I know this is sudden, but I've made some difficult decisions that are in both our best interests long term." Both our best interests. The phrase hit me like ice water. Richard Blackwell opened a leather portfolio and began reading from prepared notes. "Mrs. Ashworth, your husband has petitions for dissolution of your marriage on grounds of irreconcilable differences. Given the complexity of your shared business interests, we've prepared a comprehensive settlement agreement that addresses all relevant assets and liabilities." I stared at Cameron in disbelief. "You're divorcing me? When did you decide this? We never discussed any problems in our marriage." Cameron finally looked at me directly, but his expression was that of a business executive delivering unfortunate news to a subordinate employee. "Liv, we've grown in different directions over the past few years. You're a brilliant scientist, but we want different things from life. This settlement will give you the financial freedom to pursue your own research interests independently." My own research interests? As if the breakthrough cancer therapy that had made him wealthy wasn't already my own research? The second attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Catherine Mills, slid a document across the table toward me. "Dr. Ashworth, this settlement agreement provides for a lump sum payment of $125,000 plus health insurance continuation for 18 months. Given your professional qualifications, we believe this represents fair compensation for your contributions to the household during your marriage." Fair compensation. $125,000 for 9 years of marriage and 6 years of building a company that had just been acquired for $62 million.
"This is insane," I said, my voice rising despite my attempts to stay calm. "Cameron, we built Ashworth Therapeutics together. My research is the foundation of everything Globetech Industries is buying. You can't seriously believe I'm entitled to less than 1% of the acquisition value?" Richard Blackwell consulted his notes with practiced indifference. "Mrs. Ashworth, according to our analysis, Ashworth Therapeutics' intellectual property was developed during the course of company operations, using company resources and equipment. While your technical contributions were valuable, the business entity and its assets belong to the corporate structure established by your husband. Company resources and equipment? I felt the room spinning as I realized what Cameron had done. The laboratory equipment I had helped select and purchase. The research protocols I had developed during years of independent work. The breakthrough innovations that existed only because of my expertise. All of it was being reclassified as company assets that belonged to Cameron's corporate entity. "That's not true," I said, looking directly at Cameron. "You know perfectly well that I developed the core T-cell modification techniques before we even established the company. I brought years of independent research to our partnership." Cameron's response revealed the depth of his betrayal. "Olivia, you're misremembering the timeline. The cellular immunotherapy approaches we use were developed collaboratively after we established Ashworth Therapeutics. Your technical contributions were valuable, but the business entity and its assets belong to the corporate structure established by your husband. Our team's collective efforts." Cameron was rewriting the fundamental history of our partnership, claiming that research I had created independently somehow belonged to the company he controlled. The third attorney, a younger man named David Park, opened his own briefcase and withdrew another stack of documents. "Dr. Ashworth, we also need to address the practical aspects of this transition. Globetech Industries has requested that all current research operations continue without interruption during the acquisition process." I felt a chill of foreboding. What does that mean exactly? Cameron answered before the attorneys could respond. "It means you'll need to complete the current project documentation and train your replacement before transitioning out of the laboratory." Train my replacement? Cameron expected me to teach someone else how to perform research techniques I had developed so they could continue implementing my innovations after I was discarded? "And there's another matter," Catherine Mills added smoothly. "Mr. Ashworth's personal assistant, Natalie Preston, will be relocating to the residence this weekend to help manage the transition period. We'll need you to vacate the premises by Friday evening." Natalie Preston. I knew that name, though I had never thought much about Cameron's assistant beyond our brief interactions at company events. She was young, attractive, ambitious, everything Cameron apparently preferred over a wife who had sacrificed her career to build his empire. "You're moving your assistant into our house while you're divorcing me?" The words came out as barely more than a whisper. "Liv, please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be," Cameron said with the tone he usually reserved for difficult investors. "Natalie has been instrumental in managing the acquisition negotiations. She'll be coordinating the transition activities from the residence to maintain operational continuity." Operational continuity. My husband was explaining his adultery in business terminology, as if bringing his mistress into our home was a strategic corporate decision. Richard Blackwell consulted his watch and began gathering documents. "Mrs. Ashworth, we need your signature on the settlement agreement today. Globetech Industries requires all personal legal matters to be resolved before they finalize the acquisition." "I'm not signing anything," I said firmly. "I need time to review these documents with my own attorney." Cameron's calm facade cracked slightly. "Olivia, you don't understand the timing pressures we're facing. Globetech has been very clear that any complications in our personal legal situation could jeopardize the entire deal." "Then maybe you should have considered that before planning this betrayal without discussing it with me." Catherine Mills smiled with practiced patience. "Mrs. Ashworth, delaying this process won't change the fundamental legal realities. Your husband has filed for divorce whether you cooperate or not. The settlement we're offering is quite generous considering your limited legal claim to business assets developed by the corporate entity." Limited legal claim.
I stared at the documents spread across the table: divorce papers, settlement agreements, asset valuations, property transfers, and realized that this wasn't a sudden decision driven by marital problems. This was a carefully orchestrated plan to steal my life's work while discarding me as cleanly as possible. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked Cameron directly. He at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Olivia, the acquisition talks made it clear that we needed to simplify our legal structure. Personal relationships and business partnerships don't always align perfectly." "Personal relationships? Is that what our marriage was to you?" David Park interrupted before Cameron could respond. "Dr. Ashworth, we have Mr. Ashworth's calendar blocked until 2 p.m. for document execution. If you'd prefer to review the materials with independent counsel, we can reconvene tomorrow, but GlobeTech has indicated that delays beyond 48 hours could impact their acquisition timeline." 48 hours. Cameron had engineered the timing perfectly, using the acquisition deadline to pressure me into accepting his theft without adequate legal review. I stood up abruptly, leaving the unsigned documents on the table. "I need to make some phone calls." "Olivia," Cameron called after me, "please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. This settlement gives you enough money to start over somewhere new. You're talented enough to build a successful independent practice."
Start over somewhere new. Build an independent practice. Cameron genuinely believed that $125,000 was adequate compensation for a woman whose innovations had just generated a $62 million windfall. As I walked toward my laboratory to gather some personal items, I heard Catherine Mills speaking quietly to Cameron about potential complications and alternative enforcement strategies. They were already planning how to force my compliance if I refused to cooperate voluntarily. In my laboratory, the space where I had spent thousands of hours perfecting the research that made Cameron wealthy, I sat down at my computer and began typing emails to the few professional contacts who might be able to help me understand my legal options. But as I composed messages requesting attorney referrals and legal advice, I noticed something that made my hands freeze over the keyboard. My computer's research files, the detailed documentation of every breakthrough and innovation I had developed, were all still intact and accessible. Cameron and his attorneys had been so focused on the corporate paperwork and business assets that they had apparently forgotten about the most important evidence of all: the comprehensive records proving exactly who had developed what, when, and how. For the first time since finding those divorce papers on my dining room table, I felt something other than devastation. I felt a spark of possibility. Cameron thought he could steal my life's work and discard me with a $125,000 settlement. He had clearly spent months planning this betrayal, with expensive attorneys and careful timing. But in his eagerness to erase me from our success story, Cameron had made one crucial oversight. He had assumed that the brilliant scientist he was betraying would simply accept his narrative and walk away quietly. He was about to discover just how wrong that assumption was. After Cameron and his legal team left for their celebration lunch, I sat alone in my laboratory, staring at the computer screen that contained 6 years of meticulously documented research. For the first time in hours, I could think clearly, without lawyers pressuring me to sign documents that would erase my life's work. I opened my secure research database and began scrolling through thousands of files, each one time-stamped and version-controlled with obsessive precision. What I discovered over the next 3 hours would transform me from a devastated victim into the woman who held all the cards in Cameron's carefully orchestrated game. The first breakthrough came when I accessed my personal cloud storage account, an independent backup system I had maintained since my days at Meridian Pharmaceuticals. Hidden within folders labeled Personal Projects and Independent Research was a complete archive of my T-cell modification work, dating back to 2018, 2 full years before Cameron and I had even discussed starting a company together. Every algorithm, every experimental protocol, Every breakthrough innovation that had made Ashworth Therapeutics valuable was documented in my personal files, with creation dates that predated our marriage by months, sometimes years. The cellular modification techniques that Cameron had been claiming as his collaborative innovation existed in my files from 2019, complete with video documentation of successful experiments performed in my private laboratory space. But the real revelation came when I opened a folder I hadn't accessed in over 3 years: patent applications, personal portfolio. My hands began shaking as I realized what I was looking at. In 2019, on the advice of my former colleague, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, I had filed provisional patent applications for 3 revolutionary biotechnology innovations. At the time, Jennifer had been insistent about protecting intellectual property independently before entering any business partnerships. "Olivia, you never know how business relationships might evolve," she had warned me. "Always protect your innovations first, then worry about partnership structures later." I had filed the provisionals, and then, in the excitement of building Ashworth Therapeutics with Cameron, had completely forgotten about them. But Jennifer had been more thorough than I remembered. She had automatically converted all 3 provisional patents to full utility patents and had been maintaining them through the automated renewal system I had set up and forgotten about. Patent US 11789423, Modified T-cell activation protocols for enhanced cancer cell targeting. Patent US 11891576, Multi-receptor cellular immunotherapy systems. Patent US 11923845, Personalized cancer treatment using engineered T-cell modifications. All 3 patents were active, current, and registered solely in my name, Dr. Olivia Chen, my maiden name from before I married Cameron. Every single innovation that had made Ashworth Therapeutics worth $62 million was protected under patents that belonged to me personally, not to any corporate entity Cameron controlled. I stared at the patent certificates on my screen, barely breathing. These 3 patents covered the entire technological foundation that global tech industries believed they were purchasing. Cameron had just sold them technology he had no legal right to transfer. My phone rang, startling me out of my trance. Dr. Jennifer Walsh's name appeared on the screen, as if the universe had decided to provide exactly the help I needed at exactly the right moment. "Olivia, I just heard about the global tech acquisition through the pharmaceutical industry grapevine. Congratulations on the exit. You must be thrilled about the validation of your research." "Olivia, I need to ask you something urgent. The patent applications you helped me file in 2019, are they still active?" There was a pause. "Active? Olivia, they're rock solid. I've been maintaining them through the automatic renewal system we set up. In fact, I've been meaning to call you about licensing inquiries. Your T-cell modification patents have become incredibly valuable in the current market." "Licensing inquiries?" My heart started racing. "What kind of inquiries?"
Several major pharmaceutical companies have been asking about licensing your cellular immunotherapy patents. I've been fielding calls for months, but I couldn't reach you because you changed your contact information after your wedding and forgot to update your details with my office. I felt the room spinning around me. Jennifer, I need you to listen very carefully. Cameron just divorced me this morning and told me I have no legal claim to Ashworth Therapeutics because the technology belongs to the company. But if those patents are in my name, Olivia, that's impossible. Your patents were filed individually, years before Ashworth Therapeutics was even incorporated. Cameron would need your explicit written consent and signature to transfer those rights to any corporate entity. I never signed anything about patent transfers. The silence on Jennifer's end stretched for several seconds. Olivia, if Cameron sold technology covered by your personal patents without your consent, that's not just a civil matter. That's federal fraud. Federal fraud. The words hit me like lightning. Cameron hadn't just betrayed me personally, he had committed actual crimes. Jennifer, I need you to pull every document related to those patents, and I need to understand exactly what rights I have. I'm already opening your file. Olivia,
based on what you're telling me, you own the fundamental intellectual property that Ashworth Therapeutics was built on. Without licensing agreements signed by you personally, no one else can legally use, sell, or transfer those innovations. As Jennifer spoke, I was frantically searching through my email archives for any correspondence about patent transfers or intellectual property assignments. What I found was even more damaging to Cameron's position than I had hoped. Hidden in a folder labeled Legal Archive were email exchanges between Cameron and a patent attorney named Marcus Webb, dating from 3 months ago. Cameron had hired Marcus specifically to research potential patent conflicts that might affect the Global Tech acquisition. Marcus's report was devastating, and Cameron had received it 12 weeks before filing for divorce. Mr. Ashworth, my research indicates significant intellectual property concerns regarding the proposed Global Tech acquisition. Dr. Olivia Chen, now Ashworth, holds individual patents that appear to cover the core technology Ashworth Therapeutics is offering for sale. Any transfer of these innovations would require explicit consent and licensing agreements signed by Dr. Chen personally. Cameron's email response made me sick to my stomach. Marcus, I appreciate your thorough analysis. However, Dr. Chen's patents were filed before we established formal business operations. I'm confident that our marriage and business partnership creates sufficient legal grounds for corporate ownership of all relevant innovations. Please proceed with due diligence under the assumption that Ashworth Therapeutics holds clear title to all technology assets. Cameron had known about my patents for 3 months. He had received explicit legal warning that he couldn't sell my technology without my consent, and he had decided to divorce me and steal my innovations anyway, gambling that I wouldn't discover the truth before he completed the fraudulent sale. But Marcus Webb's report contained one more revelation that changed everything. The patent attorney had done additional research and discovered something that would make Cameron's fraud even more expensive than he could have imagined. Mr. Ashworth, I should note that Dr. Chen's patents don't just cover Ashworth Therapeutics' current products. Her cellular modification techniques appear to be foundational to multiple cancer treatment approaches currently being developed or licensed by major pharmaceutical companies. If Dr. Chen chose to enforce her patent rights broadly, the financial implications could extend far beyond your company's valuation. I pulled up the patent database and began cross-referencing my innovations with current pharmaceutical company research programs. What I discovered made my hands tremble with excitement and rage. My T-cell modification patents covered technology being used by Merck, Bristol-Myers Squibb, Roche, and at least a dozen other major pharmaceutical companies. They had all licensed what they believed were legitimate innovations from various biotech firms, not realizing that the foundational patents belonged to a scientist whose husband was trying to steal her life's work. The licensing fees for proper use of my patents across the entire pharmaceutical industry could be worth hundreds of millions of dollars, possibly more than $1 billion. My phone buzzed with a text message from Cameron. Olivia, I hope you've had time to think rationally about the settlement offer. The Global Tech team wants to finalize everything tomorrow morning. Please don't complicate this unnecessarily. Don't complicate this unnecessarily. Cameron had no idea that his simple divorce had just become the most expensive mistake in biotechnology history. I called Jennifer back immediately. Jennifer, I need you to prepare cease and desist letters for Global Tech Industries and every pharmaceutical company that's been using my patented technology without proper licensing. Olivia, are you sure you want to take this route? The legal implications could be enormous. Jennifer, my husband has been stealing my life's work for years and just committed federal fraud to sell technology he doesn't own for $62 million. I'm not interested in being reasonable anymore. In that case, I need to warn you about something else. Global Tech Industries contacted me directly 6 weeks ago, asking about licensing your patents for their acquisition. When they couldn't get your current contact information, they asked me to facilitate direct negotiations with you. My blood ran cold. What did you tell them? I told them they needed to speak with you directly since you're the sole patent holder. When they couldn't provide your current contact details, I refused to proceed.
But Olivia, they seemed very eager to make a substantial licensing deal. They mentioned something about a $60 million acquisition that depended on securing proper patent rights.
Global tech industries had tried to license my patents properly. They had attempted to go through legitimate channels to avoid exactly the legal nightmare Cameron had just created. And Cameron had proceeded with the fraudulent sale anyway, claiming ownership of technology he knew belonged to me. As I hung up with Jennifer, I realized that Cameron's celebration lunch was about to become the most expensive meal of his life. In his eagerness to erase me from our success story, he had committed federal crimes, defrauded a Fortune 500 company, and triggered patent disputes that could destroy not just his $62 million windfall, but his freedom. The devastated wife who had been sitting in this laboratory 3 hours ago was gone. In her place was a woman who owned the keys to an empire worth billions and who was about to teach Cameron Ashworth exactly what happened when you tried to steal from someone who held all the real cards. Cameron thought he had executed the perfect betrayal. He was about to discover that perfection was an illusion, and his oversight was going to cost him everything he thought he had won. Cameron returned from his celebration lunch at 4:30 p.m. looking relaxed and confident in a way that made my stomach turn. He strolled into the house whistling, carrying a bottle of expensive champagne and wearing the satisfied expression of a man who believed he had successfully executed the perfect crime. He found me in the living room, sitting calmly in the leather armchair where we used to read scientific journals together on quiet Sunday mornings. Spread across the coffee table in front of me were printed copies of patent certificates, Marcus Webb's legal analysis, and email correspondence that would destroy every assumption Cameron had made about his brilliant betrayal. "Liv, I'm glad you're still here," he said, setting down the champagne and loosening his tie. "I was hoping we could have a civilized conversation about moving forward. The lawyers think we can finalize everything tomorrow if you're ready to be reasonable." Be reasonable. I almost laughed at the irony. "Cameron, sit down. We do need to talk, but not about the settlement." Something in my tone made him pause. He glanced at the documents on the coffee table, his confident smile faltering slightly. What's all this?" "These are my patent certificates, all 3 of them filed in 2019, 2 years before we established Ashworth Therapeutics." I picked up the first document and held it toward him. Patent US 11789432 for modified T-cell activation protocols. Filed and registered under my maiden name, Dr. Olivia Chen. Cameron's face went pale as he recognized the official patent office seal. He reached for the document with trembling fingers. I don't understand. You never mentioned having patents on our technology." "Your technology, Cameron? This patent covers every cellular modification technique that Global Tech Industries believes they're purchasing from you." I handed him the second certificate. Patent US 11891576 for multi-receptor cellular immunotherapy systems. Also mine, also filed before our company existed. Cameron sank into the chair opposite me, staring at the patents with growing horror. Olivia, these must be preliminary research that we developed together into our commercial applications. The company owns the refined versions." I handed him the third patent certificate. Patent US 11923845 for personalized cancer treatment using engineered T-cell modifications. "Cameron, these aren't preliminary research. These are comprehensive patents that cover every innovation Global Tech Industries is paying $62 million to acquire." The color drained completely from Cameron's face as the implications began to sink in. But you signed the company and corporation papers. You agreed that all research would belong to Ashworth Therapeutics." "I agreed that future collaborative research would belong to the company. I never signed anything transferring my individual patents to corporate ownership." I pulled out Marcus Webb's legal analysis. "In fact, your own patent attorney warned you about this exact problem 3 months ago." Cameron's eyes widened as he recognized the document. "How did you get that?"
You left it in our shared email archive. Marcus Webb's report is very clear, Cameron. He told you explicitly that my patents created significant intellectual property concerns for the global tech acquisition. He warned you that any transfer of my technology would require my explicit written consent. Cameron grabbed the report and began reading frantically. His hands shook as he reached Marcus's conclusion that Ashworth Therapeutics could not legally sell technology covered by my individual patents. But Marcus said he thought our marriage created sufficient legal grounds. No, Cameron. Marcus said you thought our marriage created legal grounds. His professional opinion was clear. I own the patents individually, and you cannot transfer them without my signature. I leaned forward, watching his confident facade crumble completely. You chose to ignore his legal advice and commit fraud instead. Fraud? That's ridiculous. We developed this technology together as a married couple. I pulled out my phone and opened the email app. Jennifer Walsh has been fielding licensing inquiries for my patents for months. Companies have been trying to pay me directly for the right to use technology you've been claiming as your own. I scrolled through the messages. In fact, Global Tech Industries contacted Jennifer 6 weeks ago, specifically asking to license my patents for their acquisition. Cameron stared at the phone screen in disbelief. That's impossible. Global Tech negotiated directly with me. Because Jennifer couldn't reach me. I had changed my contact information after our wedding and forgot to update her files. When Global Tech couldn't get my current details, they proceeded with the acquisition, assuming you had proper licensing agreements. I set the phone down and looked directly into his eyes. Cameron, you sold technology you don't own to a Fortune 500 company for $62 million. That's not a business dispute. That's federal fraud.
Cameron stood up abruptly, pacing toward the window with manic energy. This is insane. You're my wife. We built this company together. You can't just retroactively claim ownership of our shared work. I'm not claiming ownership, Cameron. I'm documenting ownership that already exists and has existed for years. I picked up another document from the coffee table. This is a forensic analysis of my research files. Every breakthrough innovation that made Ashworth Therapeutics valuable is documented in my personal archives, with creation dates from 2018 and 2019, before we were married, before we discussed starting a company. Cameron returned to his chair, his confident, celebratory demeanor completely gone. Olivia, even if you have some legal claims, we can work this out. We can restructure the deal to include proper licensing agreements. Global Tech will understand. Will they understand that you lied directly to their legal team about patent ownership? Will they understand that you committed fraud during acquisition negotiations? I handed him another document. This is your email to Marcus Webb, where you told him to proceed under the assumption that Ashworth Therapeutics holds clear title to all technology assets, despite his explicit warning that I owned the fundamental patents. Cameron read his own email in horrified silence. I was just trying to move the deal forward efficiently. You were trying to steal $62 million worth of my intellectual property while divorcing me for $125,000. My voice stayed calm, but I could feel years of suppressed anger giving me clarity and strength. Cameron, in your eagerness to erase me from our success story, you've committed federal crimes that could send you to prison. Prison? That's ridiculous. This is a civil business dispute at worst. I pulled out my laptop and opened Jennifer Walsh's preliminary legal analysis. Jennifer disagrees. According to federal intellectual property law, knowingly selling patents you don't own constitutes wire fraud, mail fraud, and criminal copyright infringement. Each charge carries up to 20 years in federal prison.
Cameron's face went white as he stared at the legal document. But I assumed that as your husband, you assumed wrong. And your assumptions have created the most expensive legal disaster in biotechnology history. I turned the laptop screen toward him. Jennifer ran a preliminary analysis of companies currently using technology covered by my patents. We count at least 15 major pharmaceutical corporations that have unknowingly licensed my innovations through various intermediaries. Cameron leaned forward to read the analysis, his expression shifting from denial to dawning horror. This can't be right. The licensing implications would be hundreds of millions of dollars, possibly billions. Every company that's been using my patented cellular modification techniques without proper authorization owes substantial licensing fees. I closed the laptop and met his eyes directly. Cameron, you didn't just defraud global tech industries. You've triggered patent disputes that could reshape the entire pharmaceutical industry. Cameron sat in stunned silence for several minutes, apparently trying to process the magnitude of his mistake. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Olivia, what do you want? I want you to understand exactly what you've done. You spent years systematically erasing me from our success story. You lied to investors, executives, and industry leaders about my contributions. You hired expensive attorneys to help you steal my life's work while offering me $125,000 for innovations worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I can fix this. We can restructure everything. You can have half the acquisition proceeds, full credit for the research, whatever you want. I stood up and began gathering the documents from the coffee table. Cameron, you still don't understand. This isn't about restructuring or sharing proceeds. You've committed federal crimes. Global Tech Industries has purchased technology they can't legally use. The acquisition is void. Void? What does that mean? It means Global Tech can sue you for fraud and demand full repayment of the $62 million plus damages. It means every pharmaceutical company using my technology without proper licensing can face immediate cease and desist orders. It means the FBI could be very interested in your acquisition practices. Cameron's confident celebration had transformed to complete panic. There has to be a solution. You're a reasonable person. We can work this out. I walked toward the door, then paused to look back at the man who had tried to steal my life's work. Cameron, you had a solution. You had a brilliant wife who created revolutionary technology and was willing to build an empire with you as equal partners. Instead, you chose to lie, steal, and commit federal crimes. Olivia, please, don't destroy everything we built together. I'm not destroying anything. I'm finally claiming what was always mine. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Your celebration lunch is over, Cameron. The real consequences are just beginning. As I walked toward my car, I could hear Cameron on his phone frantically calling his attorneys. But all the expensive legal advice in the world couldn't change the fundamental reality he was finally beginning to understand. The brilliant scientist he had tried to erase owned the patents that made his success possible. The woman he had betrayed held all the cards in a game he had never even realized he was playing. And tomorrow morning, the entire biotechnology industry would discover that Cameron Ashworth's $62 million empire was built on theft, fraud, and the systematic betrayal of the one person who could have made him genuinely successful.
By 6 a.m. the next morning, my phone was ringing nonstop. The first call came from Dr. Michael Harrison, Global Tech Industries Chief Science Officer, followed immediately by their General Counsel, Patricia Reeves. By 7:30 a.m., I had 12 missed calls and 27 urgent emails flooding my inbox from pharmaceutical executives, patent attorneys, and biotech industry leaders. But I didn't answer any of them. Not yet. Instead, I spent the morning methodically preparing for what would become the most important day of my professional life. Jennifer Walsh arrived at my hotel suite at 8 a.m. with 2 briefcases full of legal documentation and a team of 3 junior attorneys who had been working through the night to analyze the full scope of Cameron's fraud. "Olivia, you need to understand what's happening," Jennifer said, settling into the chair across from my temporary desk. "Word is spreading through the pharmaceutical industry faster than we anticipated. Global Tech's stock price dropped 8% in overnight trading as rumors circulated about patent complications with their Ashworth acquisition." I poured coffee while Jennifer opened her laptop to show me the cascading effects of Cameron's betrayal. "How bad is it for them?" "Catastrophic. Global Tech's entire acquisition strategy was based on owning revolutionary T-cell therapy technology. Without your patents, they've essentially purchased a worthless shell company with no proprietary innovations." Jennifer pulled up financial projections that made me dizzy. "Our preliminary analysis suggests they could demand full repayment of the $62 million plus damages for fraudulent misrepresentation." One of Jennifer's junior attorneys, a sharp woman named Lisa Chen, opened her own briefcase. "Dr. Ashworth, we've identified at least 18 major pharmaceutical companies that are currently using technology covered by your patents through various licensing agreements they believed were legitimate. The potential retroactive licensing fees could exceed $400 million. $400 million. I sat down carefully, processing the magnitude of Cameron's mistake. His attempt to steal my life's work had triggered patent disputes worth more than 6 times what Global Tech had paid for our company. "But that's not the most interesting development," Jennifer continued. "We received a call at 5 a.m. from Dr. Elizabeth Morrison at the FDA. Apparently, several major drug trials currently in progress are using modified T-cell therapies based on your patented innovations." My heart stopped. "What does that mean for the trials?" Lisa consulted her notes. "If those trials are using your technology without proper licensing, the FDA could halt all related research pending patent resolution. We're talking about potentially billions of dollars in pharmaceutical development that could be suspended until licensing agreements are established." I walked to the hotel suite's floor-to-ceiling windows, looking over the city where Cameron was probably having the worst morning of his life. Somewhere out there, he was discovering that his perfect betrayal had created a legal nightmare that extended far beyond our marriage. Jennifer's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the screen and raised her eyebrows. "It's Richard Blackwell, Cameron's lead attorney. Should I take it?" "Put it on speaker." Richard Blackwell's voice filled the room, tense with barely controlled panic. "Ms. Walsh, we need to schedule an emergency meeting with Dr. Ashworth immediately. There seems to be some confusion about intellectual property ownership that's affecting the Global Tech acquisition." Jennifer smiled with predatory satisfaction. "There's no confusion, Mr. Blackwell. Dr. Ashworth owns comprehensive patents that cover all the technology your client fraudulently sold to Global Tech Industries." "That's impossible. The technology was developed during the course of Ashworth Therapeutics' corporate operations. The patents were filed in 2019, 2 years before the company was incorporated. Your client has been commercially exploiting Dr. Ashworth intellectual property without authorization for 6 years." The silence on Blackwell's end stretched uncomfortably long. "Ms. Walsh, surely we can reach some reasonable accommodation. Dr. Ashworth and my client built this company together as married partners." "Your client spent years systematically erasing Dr. Ashworth from the company's success story while planning to steal her innovations through fraudulent divorce proceedings. Any accommodation discussions will need to address both the civil and criminal implications of his actions." "Criminal implications? This is a business dispute." Lisa Chen leaned toward the phone. "Mr. Blackwell, knowingly selling intellectual property you don't own constitutes wire fraud, mail fraud, and criminal patent infringement under federal law. Each charge carries potential prison sentences of up to 20 years. Another long silence. "We need to meet immediately." Jennifer checked her calendar.
We can accommodate Mr. Ashworth and his legal team at 2 p.m. today, but I should warn you that we've already prepared cease and desist orders for Global Tech Industries and every pharmaceutical company currently using Dr. Ashworth's patented technology without proper authorization. After hanging up, I turned back to Jennifer. How quickly can we execute those cease and desist orders? We can have them delivered within 2 hours. But Olivia, once we send those letters, there's no going back. You'll be simultaneously challenging some of the most powerful pharmaceutical companies in the world. I thought about Cameron's confident celebration yesterday, about his assumption that I would quietly accept $125,000 for innovations worth hundreds of millions. Send the letters. My phone rang immediately. Cameron's name appeared on the screen. Olivia, thank God. We need to talk immediately. Global Tech is threatening to pull out of the entire deal unless we can resolve some patent issues today. Hello, Cameron. How was your evening?
Cut the games, Liv. Richard Blackwell says you're claiming ownership of patents that could void our acquisition. This is insane. What's insane is that you thought you could steal my life's work and I wouldn't fight back. Cameron's voice took on the desperate edge of a man watching his empire crumble. Olivia, I know you're angry about the divorce, but you can't destroy everything we built together just for revenge. I'm not destroying anything, Cameron. I'm claiming what was always mine legally. I walked back to my desk where Jennifer was preparing the cease and desist letters. By the way, you might want to call your insurance company. Global Tech's attorneys are preparing fraud charges that could exceed your personal net worth. Fraud charges? That's ridiculous. We developed this technology as business partners. We developed nothing together, Cameron. I created the technology independently, and you've been stealing it for years while taking complete credit. I nodded to Jennifer, who began printing the legal documents. But don't worry. You'll have plenty of time to explain your version of events to federal investigators. The panic in Cameron's voice was unmistakable. Olivia, please, let's meet and discuss this rationally. There has to be a solution that works for everyone. The solution was treating me as an equal partner from the beginning, but you chose to lie, steal, and commit federal crimes instead. I hung up and turned to Jennifer. Are the cease and desist letters ready? Jennifer handed me a stack of documents. 18 letters, all prepared for immediate delivery. Global Tech Industries, Merck, Bristol-Myers Squibb, Roche, and every other company that's been using my technology without proper licensing. By noon, the pharmaceutical industry was in chaos. My phone was ringing constantly with calls from corporate executives, patent attorneys, and biotech investors, all desperate to understand how a routine acquisition had triggered the largest intellectual property dispute in medical history. But the most satisfying call came from Dr. Sarah Hendricks, Global Tech's CEO, at 1:47 p.m. Dr. Ashworth, I'm calling to personally apologize for our company's role in this situation. We had no idea that Mr. Ashworth was misrepresenting patent ownership during our acquisition negotiations. Dr. Hendricks, I appreciate your call, but the issue isn't Global Tech's due diligence. The issue is that my husband committed fraud to sell you technology he never owned. We understand that now. Dr. Ashworth, I'm authorized to make you an offer that goes far beyond simple patent licensing. We want to offer you the position of Chief Science Officer at Global Tech Industries with complete autonomy over all T-cell therapy research programs. I felt a surge of vindication that was almost overwhelming. What kind of compensation package are we discussing? Base salary of $600,000 plus equity options that could be worth tens of millions if our T-cell therapy programs succeed. But more importantly, you would have unlimited research funding and the freedom to pursue any innovations you believe could advance cancer treatment. $600,000? Nearly 5 times what Cameron had offered me as a settlement for creating the technology that made Global Tech's entire acquisition strategy possible. Dr. Hendricks, I'm flattered by your offer, but I'm currently evaluating multiple opportunities. Multiple opportunities?
Jennifer slid another document across my desk. Dr. Morrison from Meridian Pharmaceuticals called an hour ago. They're prepared to offer $800,000 plus a $50 million research budget to establish the Dr. Olivia Chen Institute for Advanced Cancer Research. The Dr. Olivia Chen Institute. They wanted to name an entire research division after me, using my maiden name to honor the scientist who had created revolutionary cancer treatments. But the most extraordinary offer had come from an unexpected source. Dr. Robert Kim from the National Cancer Institute had called at 11:30 a.m. with a proposal that took my breath away. Dr. Ashworth, the NCI wants to offer you the newly created position of Director of Cellular Immunotherapy Innovation. You would oversee a $200 million research initiative focused on advancing T-cell therapies for aggressive cancers. $200 million? The federal government wanted to invest more than 3 times Cameron's entire acquisition in research programs led by the scientist he had tried to discard for $125,000. At exactly 2 p.m., Cameron arrived at Jennifer's law office looking like he hadn't slept in days. His usual confident demeanor was completely gone, replaced by the desperate anxiety of a man watching his life collapse in real time. He was accompanied by Richard Blackwell and 2 other attorneys, all carrying briefcases and wearing expressions of barely controlled panic. "Olivia," Cameron said as he entered the conference room, "I know we can work this out if we approach it rationally." I gestured to the chair across from me, where Jennifer had arranged documents that would demolish every assumption Cameron had made about his brilliant betrayal. The confident man who had celebrated his $62 million windfall was gone forever. In his place sat a criminal who was about to discover exactly how expensive his betrayal had become.
18 months later, I stood on the observation deck of the Dr. Olivia Chen Research Institute in Bethesda, Maryland, watching the sunrise illuminate the Potomac River through floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office. The building that housed the National Cancer Institute's most advanced cellular immunotherapy program bore my maiden name in gold lettering across its entrance, a permanent reminder that innovation belongs to those who create it, not those who steal it. The irony wasn't lost on me as I reviewed the morning headlines in Nature Medicine. Chen Institute breakthrough, modified T-cell therapy achieves 94% remission rate in stage 4 pancreatic cancer trials. Below that, a smaller article caught my attention. Former biotech executive Cameron Ashworth sentenced to 8 years federal prison for patent fraud. My assistant, Dr. Rachel Torres, knocked on my open door. "Dr. Chen, your 9 a.m. appointment is here." The 60 Minutes crew from 60 Minutes wants to review the final interview questions before filming. The 60 Minutes piece would air next Sunday, part of their investigative series on corporate fraud in the pharmaceutical industry. My case had become the textbook example of how intellectual property theft could trigger industry-wide legal disasters. But first, I needed to review the quarterly impact report that would be released later today. The numbers were staggering, even 18 months after Cameron's world had collapsed. The patent licensing agreements I had negotiated with 18 major pharmaceutical companies had generated $847 million in fees over the past year. Companies that had unknowingly used my innovations through Cameron's fraudulent licensing agreements were now paying proper compensation directly to the Chen Institute's research programs. More importantly, the legal precedent established by my case had fundamentally changed how the biotech industry handled intellectual property disclosure. The Chen standard now required comprehensive patent verification before any acquisition or licensing agreement, preventing other innovators from suffering the systematic erasure I had endured. Dr. Torres returned with the morning's correspondence. "Dr. Chen, you have a letter from the Federal Bureau of Prisons. It's marked personal." I opened the envelope carefully, recognizing Cameron's handwriting immediately. His letter was dated 3 days ago. "Olivia, I know I have no right to contact you after everything I did, but I need you to understand something. I've spent the past 18 months in prison thinking about how I destroyed the most important relationship of my life. I didn't just steal your work, I stole your recognition, your dignity, and your trust. I convinced myself that I was protecting our business interests, but really I was protecting my ego from admitting that you were the genius behind everything I claimed as my own. You deserved a partner who celebrated your brilliance, not one who tried to erase it. I hope someday you can forgive me, not for my sake, but so you can move forward without carrying the weight of my betrayals. The woman who revolutionized cancer treatment deserves to remember her triumph, not my failure. I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer. Cameron's apology was genuine, but forgiveness was a luxury I didn't need anymore. His betrayal had inadvertently given me something far more valuable than our marriage ever could have: the complete ownership and recognition of my life's work. My phone buzzed with a call from Dr. Jennifer Walsh. Olivia, I have extraordinary news. The European Patent Office just approved your applications for next-generation cellular modification techniques. We're looking at potential licensing revenue that could exceed $2 billion over the next 5 years. $2 billion. Cameron had tried to steal my innovations for a $62 million payout, never imagining that the technology he was appropriating would become the foundation for a multi-billion-dollar research empire. Jennifer, what's the status of the criminal restitution case? Cameron's sentencing included a restitution order of $127 million, representing the full value of fraudulent licensing fees plus damages. Of course, he'll never be able to pay that amount, but the legal precedent is important for future cases. $127 million in restitution for a man who had offered me $125 million to disappear quietly. The mathematical poetry of justice was almost perfect. Dr. Torres appeared in my doorway again. Dr. Chen, I have Dr. Patricia Knowles from Global Tech Industries on line 1. She says it's about the joint venture announcement. I picked up the call, switching to speaker so Dr. Torres could take notes. Patricia, good morning. Olivia, I'm calling with final confirmation that Global Tech's board has approved the Chen Institute partnership. We're prepared to invest $500 million over 5 years in collaborative T-cell therapy research, with you maintaining complete scientific autonomy. Global Tech Industries, the same company that paid Cameron $62 million for technology he didn't own, was now investing 8 times that amount in legitimate partnership with the scientist who actually held the patents. They had learned an expensive lesson about the importance of proper due diligence. Patricia, I appreciate Global Tech's commitment to legitimate innovation. The partnership agreement looks excellent. After ending the call, I walked to my office's research wall, where I had displayed the original patent certificates that had destroyed Cameron's fraudulent empire. Patent 11,789,432, Patent 11,791,676, and Patent 11,923,845. 3 documents that had transformed me from a discarded wife to the most influential cellular immunotherapy researcher in the world. But the display that gave me the most satisfaction wasn't the patents or the news articles about my breakthrough research. It was a framed photograph from last month's ceremony where I had received the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for revolutionary advances in T-cell immunotherapy that have saved over 100,000 cancer patients worldwide.
In my acceptance speech, I had specifically thanked the researchers, clinicians, and patients who had supported my work throughout its development. I had acknowledged the National Cancer Institute, the Chen Research Institute staff, and the pharmaceutical companies that were now licensing my innovations legitimately. I had not mentioned Cameron once, not in anger or vindication, but because he had played no role in the scientific breakthroughs that earned the recognition. The Nobel Committee had honored Dr. Olivia Chen for work she had created independently, protected legally, and advanced through legitimate partnerships with organizations that respected intellectual property rights. My phone rang one final time before my 60 Minutes interview. The caller ID showed Natalie Preston, Cameron's former assistant who had moved into our house while he divorced me for patent fraud. Dr. Chen, I hope it's okay that I'm calling. I wanted you to know that I followed your case throughout the trial and sentencing. I also wanted to apologize for my role in what happened to you. Natalie's voice carried genuine remorse. I knew Cameron was married when we started our relationship, but I convinced myself that your marriage was already over. I didn't understand until the FBI investigation that Cameron had been systematically stealing your work for years. What are you doing now, Natalie? I'm finishing my PhD in bioethics at Johns Hopkins. My dissertation focuses on intellectual property protection for innovative researchers, particularly women in STEM fields. I'm using your case as the primary example of how systematic credit theft can be prevented through proper legal documentation. I almost smiled. Cameron's betrayal had created ripple effects that extended far beyond his own destruction. Natalie was now dedicating her career to protecting other innovators from the intellectual property theft I had suffered. Natalie, I appreciate your call and your research focus. If you need any documentation or interviews for your dissertation, please contact Dr. Torres to schedule something appropriate. As I prepared for my 60 Minutes interview, I reflected on the transformation that Cameron's betrayal had inadvertently catalyzed. He had tried to erase me from our success story, thinking that would give him complete control over innovations worth tens of millions of dollars. Instead, his attempt to diminish me had forced me to discover my true value, not as Cameron's supportive wife or silent research partner, but as an independent scientist capable of building a research empire worth billions while saving hundreds of thousands of lives through breakthrough cancer treatments. The 60 Minutes interviewer, veteran journalist Sarah Klein, began our session with a question that got to the heart of my story. Dr. Chen, when your husband divorced you and offered $125,000 for your contributions to a $62 million company, did you have any idea that you were about to become one of the most influential medical researchers in the world? I looked directly into the camera, thinking about the woman who had sat in her laboratory 18 months ago, devastated by betrayal and convinced her life's work had been stolen forever. Sarah, I had no idea that Cameron's betrayal would become the best thing that ever happened to my career. He tried to steal my innovations and erase my contributions, but his fraud forced me to document and protect my intellectual property in ways that ultimately gave me complete control over breakthrough technology worth billions. Do you have any message for other innovators who might be facing similar systematic erasure? I smiled, remembering Jennifer Walsh's advice from years ago about always protecting innovations first and worrying about partnerships second. Document everything. Patent your work independently. Never assume that personal relationships will protect your professional contributions. And remember that your true value isn't determined by how others choose to recognize you. It's established by what you create and how you protect it. Cameron got his $62 million and lost it all within 24 hours, plus his freedom, his reputation, and his future. I had gotten something infinitely more valuable, the knowledge that I was capable of building a research empire that would outlast any betrayal and save more lives than Cameron could have ever imagined. As I ended the interview and walked back to my laboratory, I realized that Cameron was right about one thing. We both deserve to be happy. He was serving 8 years in federal prison for patent fraud. I was running a billion-dollar research institute that bore my name and had revolutionized cancer treatment worldwide. Sometimes justice and happiness turn out to be exactly the same thing. If this story of intellectual property protection and ultimate vindication resonated with you, make sure to subscribe because tomorrow we're sharing another incredible story of someone who turned their worst betrayal into their greatest triumph. And let me know in the comments, have you ever had someone try to take credit for your innovations? How did you protect your work? Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.